Hello, my name is Blue Nawa. I am currently studying at DIS Copenhagen for the spring of 2022. I want to look back at my long study tour with my core course with DIS and just sort of give you guys a glimpse of what that entails. At the time of recording this, I have 7 days left with DIS.
Don't cry, Pearl.
And looking back, I can comfortably say Core Course Week is a serious contender for the most gripping, fulfilling, original experience of my study abroad semester to my core. I think the long study week is where DIS truly shines, and I'm gonna recount the highlights of my experience just to illustrate what I mean. So for my core course, I am taking a sense of place in European literature, and like I said, we went to Berlin, which has this wonderful combination of historical and modern gems. The only caveat being Berlin is a city with a lot of open wounds. Its history is wrought with political difficulties and historical atrocities, and we visited many of the museums and the monuments that acknowledged those struggles. So thusly, it oftentimes felt grossly inappropriate to just take out my camera and vlog things. So the B-roll might be a little thin, but the stories, juicy. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we train to Berlin and get situated in our hotel, Park Inn. The plaza itself that Park Inn is located is called Alexanderplatz. The reason we roomed there is because of its cultural relevance. It is the site where the main character in this book that we're reading stays in. The book acted as a sort of a guide for us as we visited many of the spots that were mentioned in the book. We take a walk towards the center of Berlin and see the Neptune Fountain, the Marx and Engels Forum, and the bridge towards the Humboldt Forum. This is when we stopped and did the class's hallmark place-based readings and learned about the uglier history of the building, the misuse of taxpayer dollars, the stolen Afro-Asiatic art, and the general imagery and grandiosity being a symbol for colonial efforts. And this history is what I appreciate because I imagine myself being on like a weekend trip or something in Berlin, and the first instinct upon seeing this building is esteem and adoration, and then you learn the history and it's just like, it's just a good example of the importance of being skeptical of these ornate, richly decorated government buildings while traveling and then asking yourself, what is really being said here? One of the examples of some little tidbit of history that I never would have caught in Berlin is the pedestrian stoplights, where there is one more modernized stop sign and then another more anachronistic one. The modern one we're used to seeing was used in West Berlin, whereas the latter one, named Ampelman, is residue from East Berlin, meant to evoke GDR nostalgia. It's interesting because even decades after the fall of the Berlin Wall, you can still tell which side of the city you are on based on the streetlights. DIS, and our professor specifically, does a really good job of turning an entire city into a classroom. Not just the monuments and buildings, but every politically and aesthetically charged symbol becomes a moment to learn from that would have otherwise been this unimpactful, glossed over sightseeing destination. Especially in Berlin, like I imagine how hollow the experience would have been if I had just gone there as a blind tourist rather than a guided student traveler. At sunset, we toured the regally lit Brandenburg Gate and then had dinner at the freaking German Reichstag. This is a building of utmost historical relevance, and just the gravity of our class being able to have dinner at the same spot that the German Federal Assembly happened. We then visited the Kathy Kollwitz Museum. Phones weren't allowed here, so unfortunately no footage. But we got to watch some of her beautiful silhouette movies that actually inspired some of Walt Disney's animations. We then read Audre Lorde's Berlin Years poetry, zipping around Berlin, visited where she lived and where she wrote. Lunch was at the Literary House Winter Garden, this lively cultural hotspot for Berlin writers where slam poetry legends go to perform. We then strolled over to the East Side Gallery and saw artists using pieces of the now disassembled wall as their canvas. Then some homies and I visited the DDR Museum, and let me tell ya, this is probably the second best museum I've ever been to. It was so interactive, and the curators really did such a good job and had so much fun putting together all the artifacts in an interactive and yet historically informative way. We had some free time to catch some food. We ended the day at the theater watching a documentary about the late Audre Lorde, and one of her friends, who was actually a member of the original Afro-German Society, came to speak to us about her time knowing Audre Lorde. The discussions about the impact of her work and the Afro-German Society today was actually really intimate and quite tear-jerking, considering history herself was speaking to us. Day 3, we went to the Jewish History Museum. This is probably the first best museum that I've ever been to. No phones inside, but most of the experience wasn't visual but visceral. The architects construct this fragmented space that toys with your vestibular perception and your sense of dimension, and it's cramped and it's uncomfortable and it's graphic and it's supposed to emulate what it must have felt like for these doomed Jewish people during the Holocaust. I loved the museum's sensory audacity and its use of sound and variation in topography, and just depicting history in an immersive, interesting way. We then went to the memorial to the murdered Jews of the Holocaust and did some more place-based readings of Book of Clouds while discussing the interlacement of history and memory. What are the purpose of monuments? What makes an effective monument, etc. Day 4, we continued the conversation about the importance of doing monuments right at the Trump Tower Park. It is the Soviet War memorial to commemorate 7,000 fallen Red soldiers. We had a really passionate discussion about the successes and shortcomings of this monument specifically, but also Western monuments in general. DIS professors also incorporate a lot of time into the trip to just frolic around the city. So me and my homies, me and my little 3Gs, we did our own little walking tour around Berlin. We traveled on this unwieldy train trip to a planetarium to watch the stars. But since they weren't bright enough, we turned back and instead looked to the illuminated cityscape winking in the nighttime. For dinner, we had Georgian food. The Republic, not the state. This restaurant, that was some good eats. Like, I've never had Georgian food before, and I probably never would have if it wasn't for DIOs. But we tried food from everywhere. We had Georgian food, Russian food, German food, Turkish. For a hot sec, the class was looking like a sense of place in European cuisine. It was crazy. Anyways, day 5, breakfast. We went to Karl Marx Alley and looked at the architecture of socialism. The whole area is this perfect example of buildings erected straight out of ideology, and there are some telling comparisons between that area and other neighborhoods in Berlin. Free time allowed for some chill recreational reading at the outdoor Berlin Wall Memorial. The weather was a literal dream. I felt so content, so satisfied, so unbothered, just out at this beautiful city with a great book and some great people. And then, one of the most memorable moments in our trip was myself and the rest of my class went to a nude spa. There's this building in Berlin called Liquidrome that has like saltwater pools and saunas and is a completely free body nude space. And my classmates and I went together. Now, obviously, there ain't no footage for this one, but it was nice. It was freeing. None of us had ever tried anything like that before, and we were like, why not? We're in freaking Berlin. It was vulnerable, and it was completely non-sexual, and it was actually a cute little bonding moment, you know what I'm saying? That's the one thing about these study tours. You bond with your classmates in ways that never could have happened in a normal class setting. Just being with the same 20 people, traveling with them, eating with them, dorming with them, studying with them, their personalities come out of hiding in a very different way. Like, I remember the first day of class when everyone was so reticent, so awkward. Like, the typical, what's your major, where are you from? Giving very much freshman orientation. And then flash forward to the long study tour where everyone is just so goofy and so loving and comfortable with each other. I mean, how many people can say they were comfortable enough with their classmates to say they went to a nude spa together? On the surface, Liquidrome is this wacky, zany travel story, but I think deeper down, it's actually representative of the honest connections you make with the people that you study with in your core course week. Day 6. Last day in Berlin, we all had breakfast together and then went to the top of the Berlin TV tower observation deck to get one last look at the city before we leave. It was also kind of one last look at each other too, because this was the last time of us traveling together. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I think the Licorice week is really something special. You get to travel with this ensemble cast of personalities and this sparkling new city having buttery smooth, one-of-a-kind travel experiences, and I'm like, it's just special. It's really something special, I think. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, kisses from Copenhagen. Comment below with any questions, and have a good day. Peace.